I didn't grow up in the church, but I had this friend in high school, and when I would sleep over at my friend's house, his parents would invite me to church on Sunday mornings. So I got acquainted with their youth group, and when I was a junior in high school, I went on a youth retreat with them. And that's when I ended up accepting the Lord as a junior in high school. And it was awesome. I mean, for the next 4 years of my life, things were great. I was leading worship, I was plugged into a small group, spending time with the Lord, involved in the church. I ended up going to Toccoa Falls Bible College, and things were really good. Fast forward just a couple years, I was living in Atlanta and working and living in Little Five Points, and I got really involved in the party scene, and things really started to take a turn at this point. I was spending a lot of time in bars, spending a lot of time drinking, doing drugs, just hanging out with the wrong crowd. And around that time, I got arrested for a DUI, and that really began a series of events that were like a giant downward spiral in my life. I withdrew from the church, and for the next 10 years was just caught up in a series of arrest, rehab, legal consequence, arrest, rehab, legal consequence, and that just kept happening over and over, and I was miserable. Eventually, in my early 30s, I got married, and things were not going well, right off the bat. My life had become totally unmanageable at this point. And I remember on the way to work one day, just crying out to the Lord because Tiffany and I had just gotten in this big fight, and just crying out to him and saying, God, please help me. My wife was pregnant at the time, and I knew that things weren't going to work. And I said to God, help me, but don't make it hurt the way you made it hurt last time. And the last time I had lost my job, I had lost the apartment I was living in. I had to go live in a facility, like a rehab place. Well, God made it devastating. He gave me the gift of desperation. It totally broke me. A couple days later, I got arrested for my 4th DUI, and my attorney was telling me, you're going to need to brace for a year in jail. You're not going to see your family, you're probably not going to see your baby get born. And I was totally desperate. I remember being in jail and just wondering, how did things get this bad? Where did I walk away from the Lord that brought me to this point? Well, I remember being in jail, and there was this guy, and he was an inmate, and he gave me a Bible, and he was like, man, you need help. And so he wrote down this prayer on the back of his food ordering sheet. He wrote down this prayer that basically was like, Lord, release Ryan from alcohol addiction, release him from panic attacks, from depression, all of this stuff. And then he laid hands on me and he prayed it over me. And that was 8 years ago. And I haven't drank since that moment. My marriage eventually was repaired. I had to spend 2 years in an outpatient rehab program, but the courts were gracious, and I was able to avoid that year in jail that I had braced for. And my son was born during that time, and that was really the biggest gift, because my son to this day has never seen me drunk. When I was at my worst, I didn't think that anything could change me. I remember telling my wife, God himself couldn't change me, because it would require my free will, and I wasn't willing to give that up. And I was in a bad place. I felt like the worst case scenario, until he completely broke me. You know, we sing songs like Resurrection Power, and in my life, I have a good example, I feel like, or a good handle on what that means, because I knew the Lord before I met the Lord, but there was still this process of sanctification that had to be worked out in my life. And there were a lot of things that needed to die in my life. And the Lord took me through those things and has resurrected me on the other side of that. The worst things that have happened in my life have turned out to be some of the most defining things in my life. They've left the biggest marks in a good way. You hear people say sometimes that your past mistakes don't define you, and I agree with that. But God has taken what was intended for evil and used it in a way that is incomprehensible for good.